Today, we're jumping into some really fascinating work from Sriram Sharma Acharya. We're talking about the untapped powers of the human mind. Ideas that really challenge how we see reality itself. All right, so let's get right into it with a question the author throws out there. Is bigger always mightier? Does great power have to come in a big package? Well, according to this text, the answer is a resounding no. In fact, it's often the complete opposite. Think about it like this. Think about the atom. The author makes a great point. A whole kilogram of dirt can't do what a single, basically invisible atom can do, right? It's the smallest, most subtle things that often pack the biggest punch. And the scale we're talking about here, it's just wild. The source material brings up this experiment where a teeny tiny amount of ammonia, we're talking 1/1,000,000th of a milligram, was enough to stimulate an artery. A tiny, tiny cause with a huge effect. This same idea is basically the foundation of homeopathy. The whole system is built on this theory that a substance actually gets more potent the more you dilute it. It's a pretty fascinating concept, and while it's central to that philosophy, it's definitely still a hot topic in scientific circles. Okay, so building on this whole hidden power in small things idea, the author introduces this really cool concept from Vedic philosophy. And it's a big one, the idea that the entire universe is reflected inside every single one of us. So where does this journey start? It starts with Brahman. And it's important to understand this isn't described as a person or a god, but more like the omnipresent supreme consciousness, the absolute, eternal source from which everything we see and touch, the physical world, or Maya, just sparks into existence. And this is literally how ancient texts frame our whole existence. For example, the Taittiriya Upanishad tells this cosmic story where these divine powers, the devatas, actually wanted to experience the physical world. So what did they do? They chose to live inside the human body, becoming our senses, our functions, our sight, our speech. This literally turns each person into a mini version of the entire cosmos. So here's the big takeaway from that. From this point of view, our bodies are way more than just flesh and bone, right? They're seen as these vessels, packed with divine potential, a direct link to the whole cosmic shebang. Okay, so if we've got all this potential packed inside us, the next logical question is, where? Where in our biology does this stuff actually live? And that's exactly what the author tries to pinpoint next, the physical hardware for all this. And this is where things get really interesting, because the author tries to build a bridge between two totally different worlds. In one corner, you've got the ancient yogic concept of the ajna chakra. You probably know it as the third eye. And in the other corner, modern science's pineal gland, this tiny little gland deep in your brain. The author puts forward this idea that maybe, just maybe, they're the same thing, a physical anchor for spiritual insight. I mean, that's a pretty profound idea, right? And according to the text, this one spot, call it a chakra, call it a gland, whatever, is the key to everything. Activating it is supposedly how you unlock all those things we hear about in stories: clairvoyance, precognition, even telepathy. Seeing things far away, knowing what's going to happen, and, mind-to-mind communication. Well, that obviously leads to the million-dollar question, doesn't it? If we all have these incredible, dormant powers just sitting there inside us, how in the world do we wake them up? The author lays out a few different paths. You've got your disciplined spiritual practices, things like deep meditation, dhyana yoga, and these focused spiritual endeavors called s³dhan³s. Think of them like dedicated spiritual workouts. But then there are other, more external methods mentioned, like hypnotism or mesmerism. And what I find really cool here is that it's not always about trying super hard. The author argues that sometimes these powers can just pop up accidentally. Maybe they're like echoes from past lives, these built-in tendencies that just surface on their own. So to back all this up, the author doesn't just stick to theory. We get some really compelling stories, these anecdotes from history about real people who seem to have these extrasensory powers in action. Take this first one, for example. We're talking about the famous German writer Goethe. Picture this. He's just sitting at home, minding his own business, when, bam, he gets hit with this sudden, powerful, and really disturbing vision of a horrifying earthquake. And here's the crazy part. Weeks later, the news finally travels, and it turns out a devastating earthquake did hit Sicily, thousands of miles away.
And it happened on the exact same day, at the exact same time as his vision. I mean, what are the odds?
Okay, or how about this one, from literature of all places? In his famous book Gulliver's Travels, which is fiction, remember, Jonathan Swift describes the planet Mars. And he gets super specific, saying it has 2 moons that orbit in a very particular way. So, fast forward about 150 years, our technology finally gets good enough to actually see. And guess what? Astronomers confirm it. Swift's totally fictional description was 100% accurate. It just begs the question, how could he possibly have known that? So, after going through all these big ideas and these frankly bizarre stories, what's the bottom line? What's the main takeaway the author really wants us to think about? Well, the core message is this. Our minds are so much more than just calculators for our daily lives. The author describes them as these storehouses of just astonishing potential, a direct reflection of that cosmic consciousness we talked about earlier. So, really, it boils down to this. The argument is that most of us are only using a tiny fraction of what our brains can really do. Our everyday thinking is just scratching the surface. It's like we're living in a mansion, but only ever using the front hallway, while all these vast, untapped powers are just sitting there dormant. And that brings us to the final challenge the author leaves us with. It's really an invitation to think more deeply, to look past the surface-level material world, and to start exploring that limitless cosmos that might be waiting right inside our own heads. And that leaves us with one last, pretty provocative thought to chew on. If even a little bit of this is true, if the human mind really holds a universe of untapped power, then what are we really capable of? What could we become?